Every limit you experience in your life, whether it's physical, emotional, financial, mental, or spiritual, started as a story. A story that you heard, absorbed, accepted, and eventually repeated until it became part of your identity. That story might have been passed down from your family. It might have come from a teacher, a failure, a moment of pain, but at some point, it stopped being a suggestion, and it started becoming a rule. And over time, those rules became walls. But those walls, they aren't real. They feel real. They sound convincing. They're backed by memories and reinforced by patterns. But they are not concrete. They are not permanent. They are not laws of nature. They are constructs held together by repetition, emotion, and belief. And if you built them, you can unbuild them. If you created them, you can dismantle them. If you've been living inside them, you can break out. Because greatness isn't reserved for the gifted. It's not locked behind some hidden door only a chosen few can open. It lives inside you right now, not in some future version of yourself, not at the top of a mountain you have to climb for 20 years. It's in you now, waiting to be accessed, expressed, unleashed. And the only thing standing between you and that greatness is the decision to stop living by limits that no longer serve you. The moment you stop treating your limits like facts and start treating them like choices, your life begins to shift. When you decide that your standards are yours to set, your identity is yours to define, your power is yours to claim, that's the moment you begin to break through. That's the moment things stop feeling impossible and start feeling inevitable. But most people never get there. Not because they're weak, not because they don't want it, but because they've spent so long making their limits feel like home. Comfort is seductive. Familiar pain is easier than unfamiliar power. It's easier to manage low expectations than risk raising them and falling short. So people adapt to their limits. They decorate them, justify them, call them truth, and then they wonder why nothing changes. But you're here because you're done with that. You're here because something in you knows that you are more than what you've been told, more than what you've accepted, more than what you've lived so far. You're here because the idea of greatness isn't just inspiring, it's personal. You can feel it. Maybe you can't explain it yet. Maybe you've been doubting it. Maybe you've been stuck in fear or hesitation, but somewhere inside, you know this isn't all there is. And that knowing, that's where it begins. Because once you start to question your limits, they begin to loosen. Once you start to look at them with curiosity instead of fear, they begin to crack. Once you decide to stop negotiating with them, they begin to fall apart. And what's left in their place is not a void. It's power. Untapped, unexpressed, unimaginable power. So this is not about theory. This is not about hype. This is about truth. Your truth. This is about peeling back the layers of who you've been told to be, what you've learned to fear, what you've come to accept, and discovering the greatness that's been buried underneath all along. This is about challenging every ceiling you've ever hit, every wall you've ever built, every label you've ever worn, and realizing that none of it has to define you anymore. You don't need permission. You don't need perfection. You don't need more time or more validation. You need a decision, a moment of clarity, a full-body commitment to stop living at half your capacity, to stop shrinking yourself to fit the comfort zone you've outgrown, to stop chasing potential and start embodying it. Now, everything changes the moment you stop treating your limits as boundaries and start seeing them as invitations. Most people walk through life seeing the edge of their comfort zone as the end of their capacity. They run into resistance, into uncertainty, into fear, and they assume that's the limit. But resistance is not a wall, it's a door. And fear is not a stop sign, it's a signal. It's the signal that you're close to the edge of transformation. But the world doesn't teach us that. From a young age, we are conditioned to associate discomfort with danger. We're taught to avoid failure, to chase approval, to seek safety. So we start shrinking our goals to match what feels comfortable. We start adjusting our expectations to avoid disappointment. And we stop dreaming in proportion to our potential and instead start dreaming in proportion to our past. And that's where the limits start to harden. The more we repeat that pattern, set a goal, feel afraid, pull back, the more our nervous system learns that expansion is unsafe, and your body remembers. It stores those lessons like scar tissue. Every time you shrink, every time you avoid, every time you choose safety over growth, you reinforce the message. This is as far as I go. But here's the truth. Your comfort zone is not a sanctuary. It's a trap. It pretends to protect you, but what it really does is contain you. It keeps you from risking pain, yes, but it also keeps you from experiencing possibility. It keeps you from embarrassment, but it also keeps you from greatness, because anything extraordinary lives beyond that edge. Anything powerful, anything world-changing, anything unforgettable, it all happens on the other side of resistance. So the real shift, the moment your life starts to pivot, is when you stop asking, how do I avoid discomfort? And start asking, how much discomfort am I willing to embrace for the life I want? Because the gap between where you are and the greatness you feel inside you is not measured in talent or time or intelligence. It's measured in your capacity to tolerate discomfort. That discomfort might look like uncertainty, not knowing exactly how things will unfold. That's okay. Greatness is never guaranteed. There's no map for what hasn't been done yet. And if you're building something new, whether it's a dream, a skill, a version of yourself, you're not supposed to have all the answers. You're supposed to keep moving anyway. Discomfort might look like rejection, people not understanding your vision, people doubting you, mocking you, walking away from you. That's okay. You don't need their permission to evolve. Some people will never recognize your greatness until it's undeniable. Some will never recognize it at all. Their vision is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to keep becoming. Discomfort might look like failure, falling short, getting it wrong, feeling like you wasted time, energy, heart, but you didn't. Because failure is not the opposite of growth. It's the price of admission. Every misstep sharpens your awareness. Every breakdown reveals a blind spot. Every disappointment strengthens your resilience. And over time, you build not just skill, but grit. And grit is what separates those who flirt with greatness from those who embody it. Grit is the capacity to keep going long after the excitement wears off, to keep pushing after the applause stops, to keep showing up, not for approval, not for praise, but because you've decided that this is who you are now. Most people don't fail because they lack potential. They fail because they haven't trained themselves to keep moving through resistance. They let hard days mean something they don't. They interpret struggle as a signal to stop. But struggle is not a sign that something is wrong. It's a sign that you're changing. And change, by definition, is uncomfortable. So the question isn't, can I avoid resistance? The question is, how will I respond to it? Will you shrink back into the familiar? Will you return to the comfort of your past? Or will you lean into the heat, breathe through the friction, and step forward anyway? You have to build a relationship with resistance, not one of fear, but one of familiarity. It doesn't have to feel like an enemy. It can become a companion, a signal that you're stepping into something real, something meaningful, something that requires more of you and gives more back in return. And every time you face it, every time you meet resistance and push through, you expand your range. Your tolerance increases. Your threshold grows. You begin to operate at a level that once intimidated you. And before long, what used to feel impossible starts to feel inevitable. That's how limits dissolve. Not all at once, but layer by layer. One rep at a time. One conversation at a time. One brave decision at a time. And if you keep doing that, if you keep facing the edge and walking through, you start to realize that your limits were never real. They were never fixed. They were just the outer edges of your current comfort. And if you're willing to feel what most people avoid, fear, failure, friction, fatigue, you can become what most people never do. Not because you're better, but because you were willing. You were willing to feel it all and keep going. Willing to do the hard thing without the guarantee. Willing to grow in the dark before the world ever saw your light. You overcome limits, not just by challenging what you do, but by transforming who you believe you are. Because your actions will always match your identity in the long term. You can push for a while. You can force discipline for a season. But eventually, your identity, the story you carry about yourself, will pull you back to your default. That's why true transformation isn't behavior change. It's identity change. If you still see yourself as someone who struggles to follow through, someone who never sticks with things, someone who doesn't have what it takes, then it doesn't matter how hard you try. You'll find a way to return to that identity. Not because you're broken, but because your brain is wired to stay consistent with who you believe you are. So if you want to break through a limit permanently, you don't just raise the bar on your effort. You raise the bar on your identity. You start telling a new story about who you are and how you operate. Not based on your past, not based on your failures, but based on the future you're committed to creating. Because here's the thing. Identity is not fixed. It's flexible. You built the current version of yourself through repetition, through thoughts you believed, through choices you made, which means you can rebuild a new version the same way, with new thoughts, new behaviors, new decisions, repeated over time until the new version becomes automatic. And it starts with language. What you say about yourself becomes the script your mind runs. If you're constantly saying, I'm just not that confident, or I've always been bad with money, or I'm terrible at relationships, then don't be surprised when your life matches that script, because your subconscious doesn't filter for accuracy. It filters for repetition. What it hears most, it believes most. So the question is, what are you saying when no one's around? What are the default lines in your internal dialogue? And more importantly, are they helping you become who you want to be? Or are they reinforcing the version you're trying to grow out of? You can start changing that today. You don't have to believe the new story right away. You just have to start saying it. I am the kind of person who follows through. I am the kind of person who finishes what I start. I am the kind of person who keeps promises to myself. At first, it might feel fake. It might feel like you're lying to yourself. But here's the truth. You've already been lying to yourself. Every time you say, I can't, when you haven't even tried. Every time you say, I'm not good enough, when you've never tested your limits. Every time you say, that's just how I am, when deep down, you know you're capable of more. So if you're going to tell yourself a story, make it one that serves your growth, one that makes you stronger, one that calls you to rise, because your identity will eventually catch up to what you consistently repeat. And once it does, the behaviors that once felt forced begin to feel natural. But identity is not just about language. It's about evidence. You build identity through proof. Every time you show up when it's hard, you're casting a vote for the identity of someone who doesn't quit. Every time you stretch outside your comfort zone, You're casting a vote for the identity of someone who grows. Every time you choose alignment over ease, you're reinforcing the version of you that doesn't settle. And those votes add up. They don't have to be perfect. You don't need to win every day. You just need to win most of them. You need to be consistent enough that your nervous system starts to trust the new story. Because when you trust it, when it no longer feels like a stretch, you stop having to fight yourself. That's when growth becomes sustainable. That's when momentum kicks in. That's when it stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like a lifestyle. You're no longer trying to become the kind of person who does hard things. You already are. You're no longer working toward greatness. You're just expressing it. But that shift is only possible when you stop measuring yourself by where you've been and start measuring yourself by what you've decided to become. Your past is not a prophecy. Your history is not your identity. It's a record of what happened, not a definition of what's possible. And if you're serious about overcoming your limits, you got to start seeing your past as training, not as a trap. Every misstep, data, every delay, preparation, every failure, part of the blueprint. Because everything you've been through has given you exactly what you need to break through, if you're willing to use it. And once you start doing that, once you reclaim your past instead of running from it, you stop feeling behind. You stop comparing your journey to everyone else's. You stop measuring your worth by how fast you got here. Because you realize you're not late, you're right on time. And greatness, it doesn't care how long it took. It doesn't care how many wrong turns you made. It only asks one thing. Are you ready now? Not next year. Not when it's convenient. Not when the fear is gone. Now, there's a moment in every transformation when the shift becomes less about doing and more about being. In the beginning, it's about decisions, about actions, about behavior. But as those repetitions stack up, something deeper begins to form. You're not just chasing results anymore. You're becoming someone new. And at that point, growth moves from effort to embodiment. That's where real power begins. Not in the moment you achieve the goal, but in the moment you no longer need the goal to define your worth. The moment the habits become part of who you are. The moment the work is no longer external. It's internalized. You don't have to convince yourself anymore. You don't have to push so hard. You just live it. But most people never reach that place. They stop just short of it. They spend their energy chasing change instead of becoming it. They stay in a loop of starting over, falling off, getting back on track, doubting themselves, hoping next time it'll stick. But nothing sticks until you embody it. Nothing lasts until it becomes identity. And embodiment takes more than discipline. It takes alignment. You can white-knuckle your way through a season of change, but if your internal belief doesn't match your external effort, it won't hold. The weight of self-conflict will always collapse under pressure. That's why alignment is everything. When your vision, your beliefs, and your behavior are in harmony, there's no resistance. You don't have to fight for consistency because consistency becomes automatic. You don't have to force motivation because your identity is already aligned with the mission. But alignment doesn't happen by accident. It requires intention. It requires regular reflection. You have to ask yourself hard questions. Am I still operating from fear or from truth? Am I making decisions based on who I was or who I've decided to become? Am I building a life I want or maintaining one I've outgrown? The answers to those questions require honesty, and honesty requires courage. It's easier to distract yourself. It's easier to stay busy. It's easier to convince yourself that everything is fine when deep down you know it's not. But the longer you avoid alignment, the heavier your life becomes. Misalignment is subtle at first. You'll feel tired and assume you just need rest. You'll feel unfocused and assume you need a better routine. But what you really need is a realignment, a return to clarity, a reconnection to your values, a re-anchoring of your vision. Because alignment is not static. Just like your goals evolve, your identity must evolve with them. What worked for you last year may not serve you this year. The behaviors that helped you break through before may not be enough to get you to the next level. The mindset that created growth yesterday might become a ceiling tomorrow. You have to be willing to let go, to release the old version of you, even if it was successful, even if it brought you praise, even if it's the version everyone else still recognizes. Because the moment you outgrow it, it becomes your new limit. So you let go, not because you failed, but because you've evolved. You stop trying to perfect the old pattern and start building the new one. You stop polishing your past and start constructing your future. You stop seeking validation for who you've been and start embodying who you're becoming. And that embodiment, that full alignment between who you say you are and how you live, that's the beginning of greatness. Because now your power is rooted. It's not reactive. It's not performative. It's not situational. It's stable, consistent, solid. You no longer need results to feel like you're progressing. You no longer need to prove anything to anyone. You no longer need to chase approval to feel valuable. You just show up. You just live it. You just walk it out day after day. And that's when others begin to notice. Not because you told them, not because you posted about it, but because your presence changes, your language changes, your energy shifts. People can feel when someone is walking in alignment. They can sense when someone has done the work and integrated the truth. That kind of presence is magnetic, not loud, but unmistakable. You're no longer pulled in 1,000 directions. You're no longer scrambling for validation. You're not operating from reaction. You're operating from intention. And in that place, everything gets simpler. Not easier, but clearer. You stop questioning your next move. You stop doubting your own voice. You stop second-guessing every decision because you know who you are. And from that knowing, you move. But clarity takes maintenance. Just like a compass needs recalibration, your alignment needs attention. Not once a year, not just when things fall apart. Every day, through reflection, through intention, through quiet moments of asking, does this reflect who I really am? Or am I slipping into an old pattern out of habit? And when you do that, when you stay in touch with your truth, you don't have to fear burnout or boredom or distraction, because you're not just chasing outcomes anymore. You're becoming the kind of person who lives in alignment. You're becoming someone who doesn't just overcome limits, you dismantles them with presence, with power, with purpose. Greatness isn't something you stumble into, it's something you step into with clarity, with courage, with relentless consistency. And once you've begun to live in alignment with that identity, something strange starts to happen. What once felt impossible now feels normal. What used to take everything you had now feels like a warm-up, because you're no longer chasing the vision. You're living from it. But even then, the work is not done. Because greatness isn't a destination. It's a discipline. It's a way of being. It's a daily practice. And the moment you forget that, the moment you relax back into complacency, is the moment you start slipping into your old limits. And that's where many people plateau. Not because they've reached their capacity, but because they've confused progress with permanence. They mistake momentum for mastery. They think the wins they've achieved are guarantees for the future. But nothing is guaranteed. Not even greatness. Especially not greatness. Because the higher you rise, the more discipline it takes to maintain what you've built. The more focus it requires to stay sharp. the more you must guard your mind, your energy, your decisions, because now the cost of slipping is greater. You have more to lose, more eyes on you, more expectations, more internal pressure. And it's easy, so easy, to fall into the trap of performing instead of growing, of maintaining an image instead of building more substance, of managing success instead of stretching into the next level. But the truth is, there is no finish line, no final level, no moment where you arrive and the work is over. There's always another edge to find, another limit to push, another layer of your potential to unlock. And if you lose sight of that, you begin to coast. And coasting is dangerous, not because it's always obvious, but because it feels so peaceful, so earned, so justified. You've worked so hard, you've pushed for so long, and now you've arrived, or so you think. But what you call rest might be retreat. What you call balance might be avoidance. What you call stability might just be the beginning of stagnation. And if you're not careful, the growth you built starts to calcify. It stops breathing. It stops expanding. It becomes a shell of who you used to be. So you have to stay honest. You have to keep challenging yourself. You have to ask, am I growing or am I just maintaining? Am I building or am I just defending what I built? Am I living fully or am I settling into a more comfortable version of average? And this is not about pressure. It's not about guilt. It's not about being addicted to performance. It's about honoring the truth you already know, that your potential didn't expire when you reached the last goal. It evolved. And it's calling you again. And you can hear it. It's that restlessness inside of you, that pull, that whisper that says, there's still more. That inner voice doesn't want you to be miserable. It wants you to be aligned, alive, fully expressed. And it knows that you're most alive when you're growing. But that next level requires a new version of you. Not a more intense version, just a deeper one, a more grounded one, a more refined, more intentional, more integrated one. The version of you that no longer rises and falls with the chaos of life, but stands steady in your values, your vision, your process. And to become that person, you have to shift your definition of greatness. It's not just about achievement anymore. It's about alignment with purpose. It's about impact, not image. It's about making choices that are right, not just impressive. Because true greatness is not measured by applause. It's measured by how many people rise because you did, by the depth of your integrity, by your ability to keep showing up, not for reward, but for responsibility, for the sacred obligation of becoming everything you were born to be. So you begin to live differently. You speak with more clarity. You listen with more presence. You move with more conviction. You stop needing to prove anything because your life itself is proof. You stop chasing distractions. You stop wasting energy on what doesn't matter. You stop outsourcing your confidence to circumstances or social approval because you've done the work. You've built the foundation. And now you walk with certainty, not because you know what's coming, but because you know who you are. And when you live from that place, people feel it. They may not always understand it, but they recognize the power of someone who's truly anchored, someone who doesn't flinch, someone who doesn't break when things get hard, someone who doesn't waver in the face of resistance. And this is the gift of enduring the process, not just what you achieve, but who you become along the way. A person with vision, a person with values, a person who refuses to live beneath their potential, no matter how tempting it is to settle. When you've done the work, when you've broken past your limits, rewired your identity, aligned your values, and stepped into a greater version of yourself, there's one more level, and it's not louder. It's not bigger. It's not about taking more. It's about giving more, contributing more, lifting others as you climb. Because at a certain point, growth stops being just about you. The breakthroughs you've had, the pain you've endured, the resilience you've built, they're not just yours. They become your responsibility to share, not to preach, not to dictate, but to embody, to lead by example, to live in such a way that others begin to believe they can rise too. That's the full circle of greatness, not achievement for your own comfort, but transformation for the sake of contribution. And the paradox is this: the more you give, the more you grow. The more you pour into others, the more abundance flows back into you. Not always financially, not always tangibly, but in depth, in peace, in purpose. It's no longer about chasing outcomes. It's about standing in truth, about creating space for others to rise, about walking with humility, not weakness, but the strength that comes from knowing who you are without needing to prove it. This is the version of you that doesn't get distracted by ego, that doesn't measure success by comparison, that doesn't need to be the loudest in the room, because your life speaks loud enough. The way you show up, the way you love, the way you work, the way you lead, it becomes your legacy, whether anyone's watching or not. And you begin to realize the greatest use of your growth is to build others. Your insight can become someone else's shortcut. Your story can become someone else's survival. Your presence can become someone else's permission. So you stop holding back. You stop waiting for perfection. You stop thinking you need to be ready to start helping people. You start showing up now, from where you are, with what you have, as who you are, and you trust that it's enough, because it is. You don't need to be at the top to lead. You just need to be one step ahead of where you used to be. You don't need a title. You don't need a platform. You don't need millions of people listening. Sometimes all it takes is one conversation, one moment of honesty, one small act of courage that shows someone else what's possible. Because we lead best not with answers, but with authenticity, not with perfection, but with presence, not by pretending we've got it all figured out, but by refusing to hide while we figure it out in real time. And when you live this way, something powerful shifts. You stop trying to get there and start realizing you're already here. You're already living the life you once thought was out of reach, not because it's perfect, but because it's honest, because you're awake, because you're engaged, because you're no longer waiting for someone else to give you permission to be powerful. You gave that permission to yourself, and now you carry that permission into every room, every relationship, every opportunity. You stop asking, do I belong here? And start declaring, this is where I'm meant to be. Not from arrogance, but from alignment. This is when your limits stop even being a topic, because you're not fighting them anymore. You're too busy building. You're too focused on what you're creating. You're too aligned with your vision to give energy to the past versions of yourself that once held you back. And that's when you realize the greatest enemy was never the limit. It was your loyalty to it, your attachment to the old identity, your comfort in the old stories, your fear of letting go. But now you've let go. You've burned the old blueprint. You've stopped waiting to feel ready and started acting like you already are. You've learned that greatness isn't a final level. It's a lifestyle. It's in the way you wake up, the way you think, the way you treat people, the way you talk to yourself, the way you decide to keep showing up, not just for your goals, but for your growth. And more than anything, it's in the way you refuse to shrink, the way you refuse to settle, The way you refuse to go back to a version of yourself that felt safe but small. Because now that you've tasted expansion, now that you've felt the stretch, now that you've moved past the walls, you're not going back. You're not apologizing for your ambition. You're not hiding your hunger. You're not pretending you don't want more. Because you do. And that desire is sacred. That desire is direction. That desire is your soul reminding you what you're made for. And now you follow it. Not recklessly, but relentlessly. Not perfectly, but powerfully. You walk your path, not to prove your worth, but to express it. Because you know now you were never lacking. You were never broken. You were never behind. You were just underexpressed. And today, you are done living underexpressed. Today you live expanded. Today you lead. Today you contribute. Today you embody greatness, not in some distant future, but right here, right now, in the way you show up, in the way you serve, in the way you rise. You've seen now that your limits were never locked doors. They were invitations. They were checkpoints. They were signals asking, how far are you willing to go? How deeply are you willing to meet yourself? How committed are you to becoming everything you know you can be? And for too long, you may have answered with hesitation, with delay, with someday. But now there's no more room for someday. There's only now, not in theory, not in fantasy, in practice, in action, in how you carry yourself from this moment forward. Because your potential has always been with you. It's not something you earn. It's something you activate. It's something you embody. And to activate it, you don't need more information. You don't need another book, another course, another motivational video. You need alignment. You need ownership. You need a decision so deep, so non-negotiable, that it rewrites the way you walk into every day of your life. That decision isn't about working harder. It's about working differently, from a new level, with a new standard, from the identity of someone who is done waiting, done hesitating, done shrinking, from the identity of someone who is committed to expansion, no matter how inconvenient, no matter how uncertain, no matter how uncomfortable. Because the real work, it's not always flashy. It's not always exciting. Sometimes it's silent. Sometimes it's slow, but it's sacred. It's sacred because it honors who you are becoming. It honors the vision you hold inside. And it builds a foundation strong enough to support the kind of life that doesn't collapse under pressure. So now you carry that vision forward. You protect it. You honor it. You build around it. You stop handing it over to fear. You stop editing it to make others comfortable. You stop waiting for perfect conditions to step into your greatness. Instead, you choose to live from it, speak from it, move from it, make decisions from it. Because it's not about where you came from, it's about where you've decided to go. And every limit you break, every layer you shed, every version you release, makes space for the one you're stepping into. You will not always be understood. That's okay. You're not here to be understood. You're here to understand yourself, to know yourself deeply, to trust yourself fully, and to rise again and again, no matter how many times the old story tries to pull you back. Because you're done living inside a story that was never yours. You're done watering down your fire. You're done hiding your hunger. You're done postponing your power until you feel more ready, more approved, more comfortable. Greatness is not waiting for you out there. It's here, in your next breath, in your next choice, in the way you show up when it's hard, in the way you return when you've slipped, in the way you raise your standard and keep raising it. Not because you have to, but because you know you were built for more. And now that you know, you can't unknow. Now that you've seen it, you can't unsee it. Now that you've heard the call, you can't pretend you didn't. So the only question left is, what are you going to do about it? not tomorrow, not eventually. Now, because this is your life, and you don't get a second one. You don't get to repeat the version of you that stayed quiet, that played small, that lived behind walls built by fear. You get to choose every day who you are, how you live, what you stand for, and what you're no longer willing to settle for. So choose expansion. Choose courage. Choose integrity. Choose to live in a way that demands your potential to rise. Choose to leave behind every story that kept you stuck. Choose to answer the call, not just with words, but with movement, with action, with embodiment. You are no longer the person who lives beneath their greatness. You are no longer the person who lives in fear of their power. You are no longer the person who only dreams about what could be. You are the person who decides, the person who leads, the person who rises.